Hi, this is Emma Tucker, Head of Internal Communications at Temenos on Remote Control Season 2.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for joining us again on Remote Control. You're officially the first guest to hit a hat trick of appearances. You're almost like a co-host to the show.
Thanks, Jack. I feel very honoured to have been on the show 3 times. When I was thinking about it, I realised it's a year ago that we did the very first one, and it feels like a lifetime ago, not a year ago. But I know we talked a lot about remote working, and I was going to ask you whether you feel partly responsible for what's happened in the last 6 months, because you predicted the trend.
I know it's a bit too spookily prescient of me, wasn't it, to be talking about remote working at the end of
I know.
2019. I didn't quite factor in that everyone would be working remotely in 2020. So, although it timed nicely with the podcast, I cannot claim any credit, and that's my
And
official line.
you don't want to claim the credit. No, that's
No,
quite
not
right.
quite. No. I mean, you mentioned it was the first time we spoke was, almost 12 months ago, to the day, I think. And
Yeah.
then when we last spoke, it was pretty much 6 months ago, I think last week, actually. So, and that was just a few days after lockdown in the UK had started. And that just seems, that seems like a lifetime ago, let alone the first time we spoke 12 months ago.
Yeah, I know. I think that in 6 months ago we were pretty much in full kind of crisis mode. Um, but also I think we were kind of optimistic that things might come back to some form of normality over the summer, and I think we glimpsed that. But yeah, that's not the way it's going at the moment, which is pretty difficult actually, both in the UK and globally, I think.
Yeah, you're right there about the crisis mode. That was really right at the start here in the UK of the big restrictions being put on businesses and in people's lives, really. And like you say, I guess some of that was eased in the summer, but certainly some of the most recent restrictions in different parts of the UK does make it feel like it's going to be a difficult period. And when we first started, we didn't really have an idea of how long it would be. People were saying that 12 weeks would be really hard. I mean, that's obviously flown over and long gone. And the last time UK wide restrictions were put in place, it was mentioned about 6 months, and it just seems like a tricky situation to be in, but perhaps less of a crisis scrambling to get everything sorted, and perhaps more time to be more methodical and planned out about things now, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think you can, we can't, I think, stay in crisis mode on an ongoing basis. It's just not, it's not something that you can sustain, I don't think. But um, yeah, how we make it feel normal when it's anything but, it's not easy, definitely, and it's different for different people as well.
Yeah, that's actually one of my questions, was to find out how things had changed for employees at Temenos this year, really.
Well, I think if I was thinking about this, and in some ways I would say that, everything's changed, but then everything's the same as well. So I think when we spoke in March, I had mentioned that 98% of our employees were able to work from home within a matter of days. And I think as a global tech company, remote working has kind of always been part of what we've done. We've always worked with banks and with colleagues in lots of different locations. So working remotely didn't come as such a shock. We were able to move quite fast and be quite agile about it. We had tools like Teams and Skype and Zoom already in place. We already ran virtual meetings. So that stuff wasn't as difficult. Although I will caveat that by saying for our teams in India, which is about sort of 50% of our workforce, that wasn't entirely true. They were predominantly office based. So I think the shift for them has been bigger. But it's definitely not been easy for anyone. I think the pressure has been immense. Everything that we do at Temenos is all about making banking better. And the crisis has really accelerated the need for banks to transform digitally. So we felt that pressure as well, which I think is true for a lot of tech companies. But I guess the motivating element of that is that, where customers are looking for our solutions to help them to, serve their customers better through digital banking solutions, or to help governments roll out the financial rescue packages. Our software is helping banks to do that. So it's really rewarding to be involved in work that's actively supporting people who are suffering through this time. But obviously the other side of that is that the workloads are increasing. People don't have that divide between home and office that they used to have. And it's a struggle. It's not easy. And then you've got the sort of normal anxiety of the sort of health concerns as well. I think it's an incredibly difficult time for people.
Yeah, that's quite a cocktail of influences on working and well, I was going to say social life, but outside of work life, I suppose it is really, in terms of wanting to do the work and having that positive change for other industries to make a positive change in countries and to people's lives, whilst trying to avoid burnout, I suppose, and knowing when it is time to switch off and put emails away, put the computer down, and just get into a different space of wherever you are. If you're able to get outside, that's been one of the things I've been trying to do, is get outside more often, because it's very easy to realize that you spent all day inside, and that's not usual for most people.
Mm,
And it's just kind of getting that change in place. It's a bit of a mindset, whereas previously you had to go outside to commute to work. You don't have to do that now, and just kind of almost putting that that change, that break in place is tricky, because you can see that other people are working hard. You can also see that other people are perhaps being put on furlough or losing their jobs altogether, and it's kind of that
mm.
combination of, well, I don't want to be seen to be shirking by taking a break and going outside, because lots of people are in different situations. But yeah, it's looking after yourself and hopefully seeing that your work benefits from that, as well as by trying to avoid that burnout.
Yeah, and I think, you have to do it for yourself. I think, with even the best managers in the world, they may say to you, go and make sure you take a break, but it's still you having to go away and take that break, and you have to do it for yourself. Um, but I think it does make you more productive, and it makes you, keeps you sane, if you like. So it is massively important to do it. But yeah, I think you have to be quite intentional about it.
Yeah, that's a good word, intentional, and getting nice and planned out. So how about for you? We talked about obviously employees and Temenos as a whole, leading the internal comms for a global company. The past 6 months must have been, well, the one word I can think of is challenging, but I don't really suppose that sums it up quite well enough.
Yeah, it's been well, yeah, definitely challenging. It's
Hmm.
a mixed bag, really. I think it's been kind of the best and the worst time to work in internal communications. I think the best because people have realized the value in it. We've communicated more, we've communicated better, I think, in the sort of tone and the style that we've used. I think we've done a much better job at kind of collecting the stories of the work that our people are doing to support the banking industry. So that's been really rewarding to be part of, but it's tough because it is unrelenting, and I think people are craving communication because they're looking for answers. But there is no certainty around this. So it also therefore makes communicating really challenging because you can't really provide the answers that people want. Um, and also it's difficult because whilst this is happening globally, it isn't a consistent experience. whether it's in different countries or just on a personal level, my experience of this will be very different to somebody who lives alone or someone who's been furloughed or someone who's got an underlying health condition. So, I have to even though it's been busy and stressful, I count myself lucky that I've been able to work. Yes, it's been tough. I had my daughter was at home for parts of it, but she's now back at school, so things are feeling a bit more normal. But yeah, it's a mixed bag, is how I would describe it, Jack.
Yeah, I can understand that. You mentioned there about the response that you're having to deal with is local to the UK, and in some aspects within the UK, it's local to regions as well. How have you found kind of managing comms for a workforce that is global, where there's been different restrictions at different times, perhaps different cultural approaches? I mean, that's the same in the UK. There's different cultural approaches to the restrictions, and whether people are for or against the restrictions that are put in place. How have you found that kind of expanded across kind of a global workforce? How's managing comms been with that in mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's confusing, right? I think, and the messages change at a local level all the time. So trying to provide a level of consistency and a global approach to it hasn't been easy. And I think we've done it in two ways. We've relied heavily on the business continuity and the HR teams who are kind of more on the ground. So they've done a great job of kind of capturing what it looks and feels like at a local level, and to provide this sort of data on what's happening on the ground. And then broadly, I think we've done what every company has probably done, in that we've said, you've got to follow local government advice. You don't travel unless you have to. We've put in, hygiene practices into the offices for when they are able to open. And we've been using a traffic light system really to give that kind of global view, so that all employees can see what locations are open and what aren't. So we've said kind of things like, green means that everything's open and running as it did prior to COVID. Amber means that the offices are open, but teams are working in kind of in two. So you're either in team A or team B, so that we can kind of aid social distancing. And then red is where people are working from home. So at the moment, I think 90% of our offices are either in amber or red. It did look a bit brighter in August, but yeah, it's kind of gone backwards again. But yeah, it isn't easy. As I say, we've had to. I think our approach has been one of flexibility, because I think you can't take any other approach. And just trusting people to do the right thing as well.
Yeah, flexibility makes a lot of sense especially when the guidance coming out, like you say, changes so frequently. It's hard to have a set system in place, and as long as those channels and people know where to get the information from a business point of view, from a Temenos point of view, then it seems like that's as foresighted and as planned as you can be, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would. There are things that I would have liked to have maybe done differently or would do differently still, but we don't have a great intranet site, so that limits our ability to kind of really create a tailored communication for people in their different regions. So we've had to kind of keep things quite global and quite broad.
Touching on the activities, you mentioned there were some things that you'd maybe like to have another go at, see if you could do better. But what things have you found that have worked really well at Temenos?
So I think if I think about things that have kind of changed over the last 6 months, I think the tone of our communication is much more humble, more people centric. more human, which sounds silly, but it's true. Like I think it's a difference to how we communicated before. I think because we're a growth company, so we've historically found it very easy to kind of excite people about the future because we're growing, the future looks bright and strong. And I think that is still true for us in the long term. It's certainly true, but the message doesn't quite work at the moment. So it needs to be a bit more nuanced. So we can still say, yes, we've got a bright future, but the experience that people are having at the moment doesn't feel that bright. So, what we've done is where we've previously talked about, when we've, say, for instance, taken a bank live on our software, we've talked about the kind of cost and efficiency gains that the bank has seen. But now we're talking much more about the people and the people that have been involved in implementing that software. So, one example that we've used is one of our consultants from India was working on a project with PayPal, and he stayed in the US. He chose to stay in the US from February right through to the summer to get the project with PayPal done. And we didn't ask him to do that, but that was his kind of commitment for the job. And so we've used that, we've communicated that more than we've communicated the bank going live on the software. That has been a real shift, and I think that has been a welcome change for people. I think it kind of shows a sort of maturity into how we're talking to our people as well. We've also been quite intentional about keeping the kind of business as usual communications going. So I think we've continued to communicate on appointments, on any accolades that we've got from the industry. We've kind of pivoted all our client events to be virtual, as everybody has done, and we've continued to kind of showcase those internally. But I think everything has taken on a more of a human kind of tone, and I think that that's something that we will keep, because I think we've all realised that that's a much more inspiring way to communicate. It sounds really obvious, but I think you get used to communicating in a certain way, and I think that's been a welcome change for people.
That sounds really fascinating, and while you say it sounds obvious, it's potentially only after the fact that it might be obvious, and when things are going really well, like you mentioned, kind of growing and kind of launching new software and apps and bringing on board clients very, very quickly, then to find the kind of the person-led stories is maybe hasn't had that kind of need, or might not have had that resonance, but now, while everyone's going through something on a personal level, then yeah, it does make a lot of sense. So that's really, really interesting to hear that change has happened and looks set to stay. That's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely, and it's influencing not just the internal communications, but also some of our marketing initiatives too. So a lot of our customer stories are now going to be more about the people at the banks as well. So I think I think there's definitely some positives that will come out, and I think this is true for lots of people. It's not been all bad, the things that we've taken from the crisis. I think there's definitely some positives to draw from it as well.
Oh, that's good. And you mentioned virtual events. How have they been received, and how have you found working with those? Because they are quite different, and everyone that's been running an event has had to change to virtual events in some form, whether it's online kind of learning, like webinars or videos with Zoom or different platforms. How have you found kind of managing those?
Yeah, I think they're good and bad again, because they're great in that they're really accessible for people. It doesn't matter where they are in the world or what time it is. Everybody can access the same information. Maybe not necessarily live, but you can certainly get it on demand. And I think that's quite a leveler for people, and I think that is really welcome. But you probably don't have the same I think we've always ran big events at Temenos, and they're not only an opportunity to connect with the customers and the partners and other people that we interact with, but also a chance for employees to come together. And I think a lot of our employees traveled a lot before COVID as well. And I think that's been quite difficult then for them to kind of completely stop that whole way of life, um, and get used to just kind of being restricted at home, if you like. And so I think that the virtual events don't give you that ability to connect with people. Like, you can connect with the content much easier, I think, but I don't think you connect with the people in the same way. And I think that's the challenge, and that's not unique to Temenos, but I think that how we foster that human connection in these times isn't I don't know the answer to it yet. It's
No.
really difficult.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we run virtual events for lots of people at Stream Go, and one of the challenges that we often come across is the human connection, the engagement, the networking, I'm not going to kind of sit here and talk about the different features, but I think some of it is not to do with the technology. Actually, I think it's to do with the setting. So you talked about people, employees having traveling quite a lot, and while people have been celebrating not traveling for work, actually for a lot of people that's a great chance to meet different people. You take yourself out of your normal day-to-day setting, and you can be a bit more open and free when you're talking to people, and you put yourself in a different mindset. I know from when I've been to events, you're in a different mindset about networking and about going up and speaking to people that you don't know, but that are there for a shared reason. And potentially virtual events don't have that impact because people aren't taking into account that the setting for someone hasn't changed. In all likelihood, they've been on emails, on instant messenger chat,
Mm.
doing their work, and then just opened a new browser. They're still in the same seat, in the same room. Spotify might be playing in the background, whatever might still be happening whilst they're at the event, and that just doesn't happen at physical events. So I think there's some thought needs to go into the setting, or how you can maybe prep people for the setting, whether it's almost bringing back those maybe cringy icebreaker type sessions at the start of your event, and just
Yeah.
energizing people that way for that kind of that engagement. I'm not sure of the answer at all, but I think some of it will be down to technology and what's available, but other parts of it will be down to how you prepare attendees or employees for an event, and kind of set the expectations about kind of what to get from it. And yeah, there's maybe something around that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's, how do you bring that whole experience virtually? It's not easy to do it. I think we did an event last week, or a couple of weeks ago now, and we had a session the night before for some kind of VIP guests, and they were basically sent like a cooking pack or recipe,
Oh, wow.
ingredients, various things, and they joined this kind of virtual cook-off. And it was really cool. It's really cool, and I think that kind of thing is probably what we need to do more of. So you create these events that you're all doing simultaneously, just in your own kitchen, rather
Yeah.
than you know um, in a catering location. But yeah, I think it's that kind of thing is probably where things will start to move.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. I mean, I'd be terrible at that, but yeah, that sounds like a really great way to
Yeah, so
get people
I
engaging.
didn't get to join it, but it sounded pretty fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really interesting, and a great example of something a bit different, that yeah, work to engage people. And you mentioned previously about some things that maybe you'd want to have another go at, try again. Is there anything like that then that's kind of needed to be finessed to get to work, or is there anything that you've kind of tried and thought, do you know what, that's not working, let's just put that down and kind of scrap that? It seems like there's a lot of time for trying things quickly, and just want to see kind of how that worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do something around connecting the CEO and the leadership team with people, because previously, before COVID, we'd ran some really successful face-to-face meetings. So he'd essentially kind of gone and done some kind of town halls and informal networking with employees when he was kind of visiting certain locations. So he'd been to Singapore and India, the US, Poland in the previous year, and people employees really liked it
Mm-hmm.
because it gave them a chance to kind of just chat to him about just something they were working on, or just more broadly, and hear his perspective on things. And we really haven't been able to recreate that in the same way at a virtual level, because it's those little conversations that happen on the side that people walk away from and say, oh, that was good. He recognized my face, or he knew that I was working on this project, or whatever it might be. And I think we haven't been able to find a way to kind of replicate that in a meaningful way. We were setting up kind of virtual coffee sessions at one point, but we kind of said, unless you've got maybe 5 people in the room in joining virtually, no one's going to talk. If you start putting 50 people in a
Yeah.
virtual room, people won't talk. So how do we do this? And then when we thought, well, we've got 7,000 employees around the world, there's absolutely no way that we can do this. And so we scrapped that idea, and we haven't, in all honesty, come up with something that replicates it, or replaces it in any way. So yeah, it's really tricky. It's really tricky.
Yeah, interesting. You talked about the value of those perhaps being in those informal um, parts of the meeting, being recognized, or just a little comment about a project that's being worked on. That's not necessarily the focus of the whole conversation, but yeah, totally, that would make someone feel proud that the CEO has recognized them, or knows what they're working on. That's kind of good, great recognition and validation. And yeah, I can totally see how that would be difficult on a virtual call. Even just, and you mentioned, if you get 50 people on a virtual call, no one's going to talk. Yeah, but imagine if they did, that would be potentially
Yeah,
even worse, talking
yeah,
over each other.
exactly.
So it's kind of like you say, it would need to be smaller groups, and for a company so big, it would be, yeah, it would be a full-time job just doing that and
Hmm.
managing that. So yeah, that seems like a tricky one. I know my my wife, her company have set up a coffee roulette where they get paired up with just one person, and they've got to find, I think it's either 30 minutes or an hour in a week to have a chat. And it's people from within the company, but they might not have worked with before, and it's just potentially a bit of time to kind of put the work tools down, and maybe introduce yourself, or reconnect with someone that you had been working with on a bit of more of a personal level, and find out how they're doing it. I thought that was
That's nice. Yeah, I
yeah,
like
that's
that.
nice. And that's not particularly, a manager getting designated that they'll only speak to maybe junior staff. It's, it's all levels, and I believe it's opt in, but yeah, it seems to have been good uptake. And yeah, she often talks about kind of the conversations that she's had, and found out, people's lockdown arrangements, and if they're at the kitchen table, or if they've got their own little office, and stuff like that. And it seems to help make those person to person connections, and maybe just forget about the work thing for a little bit. And it makes, when they do work together, just a little bit easier, and a little bit more
Hmm.
like it would be in a face-to-face environment, where you do have those social cues, and kind of a little bit of personal information that you can kind of bond over, and kind of almost grease the wheels of a work project, when you do have that personal connection.
Yeah, it's massively important, and I think we've all missed it, haven't we, in the last 6 months? I think that work isn't, yeah, work is about doing your job, but it is so much about the people that you work with and how you work with them. And I keep thinking about people that have joined the company recently, and
Mm.
we take for granted the pre-existing relationships that we had already built up, and it is so much more difficult for new people to kind of form that bond with their colleagues, because they're not seeing them every day, and they don't just have those little informal chats. Oh, did you watch that on telly last night?
Yeah.
Or did you do this? It's you have to be really, as I said before, intentional about it. And when you're busy and you're stretched already, they're the things that go. So I think there's definitely some things that we can, or we could and should be doing at a kind of corporate level for the organization to foster those informal connections. Certainly for the rest of this year and next year as well.
Yeah, really good point about people joining. And at Stream Go, we've grown massively in this time in delivering virtual events, probably be expected. Like headcount has kind of really gone up, and as we've scaled up to meet new clients and more demand from existing clients. But yeah, like I'm sitting here and I can think of a number of people that I've spoken to briefly on chat in maybe a team meeting, but there's lots of people there that in reality, for me, they're I know the name, the job title, what they're working on, but I don't know kind of their personality. Whereas the people that were a Stream Go beforehand, and we're kind of sharing an office, totally know the personalities. There's a huge Disney fan, Andrew, if you're listening, that's you. There's all sorts of different types of people, and it's just those little things that about people does really make an impact. And it's kind of wanting to get those situations kind of back into the mindset, and finding out that information that's beyond the work that you do, I think is very, very important. So actually, I think I'll make a note to go away and find out a bit of information about some of the people that have started since lockdown and make a real effort. It does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think, you have to, I think one of the things that we're going to try and do is because it's difficult to kind of mandate something like that at a global level within the organization, because it needs to feel natural and authentic. I think if we start telling people you've got to do this, it doesn't feel right. But what we want to do is start using managers more and training them on different things that they could suggest to their teams, even if they don't get involved and it's just that their team members do it. But part of it is that kind of coaching them around, how to kind of position this so that it doesn't sound like an order. Go and have a virtual coffee with someone, because that just gets people's backs up. But yeah, it is difficult to roll these sorts of ideas out at a kind of global level. In big organizations, I think the organizations whose cultures and things will come throughout this successfully will be often, I think, the smaller companies that have been able to kind of retain that kind of connection on some point, or the big ones that have said, you know what, how you do this is up to you, because we can't tell you how to do it, if that makes sense. But these are the kind of guiding principles, which is kind of the approach that we will take with it.
Yeah, and like you say, it relies probably most importantly on the culture. If that culture's been there before, about building those relationships, it will find its way through this new challenge. If it's not been there before, it's going to be quite hard to pick it up in a remote, or I'd imagine it would be quite hard to kind of introduce that culture at this time, when it's potentially harder than ever to make those personal connections. So yeah, if the culture's there, then it has every chance of breaking through the current challenges, I'd say.
Yeah.
So this might be a tricky question, because talking about planning. Now, I'd be pretty surprised if anyone had planned for 2020 and got it kind of nailed on. But I was just wondering if there's anything that you've managed to take away from the challenging situation, the new normal or the current normal, whatever we want to label it as, for 2021 plans or the end of this year? How is that? Is that even kind of on your radar at the minute?
Yeah, we have started talking about it. Certainly, we've started putting some plans in place for the end of this year, and we started talking about 2021 objectives. So for the last few months of this year, I think what we want to do is recognize the fact that it's been a tough year for everybody. We know there's kind of been a dip in morale because people aren't enjoying that level of face-to-face contact that they had before. Um, and whilst we can't bring people together physically, we are going to kind of try and bring together people together more virtually, and we're going to try and excite them again about the future and why Temenos is such a great place to work. And I think we are doing some great things already with the banking industry, but also our organization is moving to be cloud and SaaS first, so software as a service, which is a really big shift from where we've come from. So we've historically been a product company, so we've built great product and we've sold that product, and we've kind of, I mean, not quite as crude as this sounds, but we sort of handed it over to banks and said, off you go. Where now we've got to provide an ongoing level of service and support and continual upgrade to that software, which comes as a comprehensive package for banks. And I think that's quite a cultural shift for the organization, and it requires a change in behavior for people working in the product, for people working in sales. And what we want to do is start kind of setting that vision for the future, and also using our managers better to help articulate what that means for people on the ground. Now, a lot of that work is still in progress. So I think probably the reality will be that for the rest of this year, it will be about creating that vision. And then next year will be more about putting some kind of concrete, connections in place for people to say, right, this is what I do, and this is how it connects to our move to being a SaaS first company. But that's quite exciting, and I'm particularly excited about kind of creating some toolkits for managers, because we've not really done that properly before, and we also want to do a better job of using managers to kind of feedback, so sharing this information with their teams, but also feeding back what their teams are telling them about it. So that's quite an exciting one. And then the other thing that we're looking at is kind of what the future of work at Temenos really looks like post-COVID. So taking the lessons that we've learned from this, where people are working remotely, we're looking at kind of, how do we use our offices? Do we need offices in 64 countries around the world? And what do those offices look and feel like now? Because they're probably going to be much more about working collaboratively than they are about just sitting at your PC and working. So I think what we want to create out of that is a really consistent and enjoyable employee experience. And I think that's, for me, one of the reasons why I do internal communications and what I love about what I do. So that is a really exciting project, but it's a big one. It's not something we can solve overnight, but it's exciting that we're thinking about all of these things, and we're starting to kind of put some work into action around it as well.
Yeah, great to have some big exciting projects that are, even if they're just taking the first initial baby steps to get the plans in place, or to kind of get the cogs whirring and get the thoughts in motion. That's often some of the most inspiring time, getting the thoughts and all the different possibilities out there on the table. Really interesting that you're talking about managers. It's something that we touched on when we first spoke last year, and has come up in a lot of the podcast recordings since on remote control, the fact that when we're talking about such big companies who and I guess historically it was mainly big companies that had remote workers because they were remote across the world, and that's changed now. But having those line managers perform more of an engaged, more of an involved internal comms coaching process is really interesting, and it does seem that that's getting spoken about and getting focused on a lot more, from research out there to some Twitter polls I've seen from some other people in internal comms. It just seems like there is a bit more of a recognition perhaps, and plans in place now to really identify managers as or maybe the key channel for internal comms. I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned it too.
Yeah, I think, I think within internal communications and probably within HR functions as well, I think we've probably always recognized that the role a line manager plays in an employee's experience, or how they think and feel about work, is huge. It's probably the most important thing. But yeah, we haven't really done a very good job of kind of using them both to kind of share the great stuff that's going on in the company, and support their employees and kind of coach them on communication. And I think that we definitely need to do that, because a line manager might be somebody's only contact with the organization at the moment. It shouldn't necessarily be that way, but that could well be the case for some people. So if that line manager isn't good, or isn't is struggling to know what information to share with their team, then that can be a real issue. So I think it's going to become even more important. And I think the crisis has just kind of highlighted it as a potential weakness for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, definitely. So this is not the most serious question, but it is one that people will be scribbling down the answer to. The first time we spoke, which was, like we said, about 12 months ago, you were watching the BBC drama The Capture, and I almost gave you a spoiler because I'd just finished it. So I was just wondering what's got you through lockdown, and would you recommend anything?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, I think I probably watched much lighter things because things have been so difficult at work. And then I was thinking about what I've been watching. I was like, none of the things I've watched are light in any sense. So I watched The Handmaid's Tale, which is far from light.
Yeah.
And I'm really disappointed that the next season has been disrupted by COVID, because I really enjoyed that one. And actually, at the moment, I'm watching True Detective. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen those when they were on Sky at the time. I love them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. With Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, or they're in the first one.
yeah,
It's brilliant. The acting is so good. So we've just started the second season of that. But yeah, I'm enjoying that. But yeah, pretty gritty and
yeah,
dark.
yeah. I mean,
So
that's not quite the respite from a
no, it's really
troubling
not.
world.
No. So I'm not sure what that says really, but
Yeah, well, I was speaking to Jennifer Sproul from the Institute of Internal Comms last week, and she was just going for every murder mystery going. So yeah,
yeah.
she was saying the escape was the fact that it was nothing like a job, which sounded like a plausible excuse, I suppose.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe what we watch these things because we're like, this is worse than working in internal communication.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what it is.
Well, yeah. Well, when Netflix release a drama series about internal comms during COVID-19, perhaps we can tune in then and see how realistic it
Maybe.
was.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on again to Remote Control, Emma. It's been fascinating talking to you and hearing some of the experiences that you've had and the experiences from Temenos. So yeah, really thank you. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jack. No, it's been a pleasure as always, and it's always a nice opportunity to kind of step back and reflect on things. So thank you for having me.
Remote Control, an internal comms podcast by Stream Go.